Hello friends, and welcome to Ariel's Twilight Years, how to be a really old model. I've got a new coat and I love it so much that I'm wearing it indoors, even though I don't really need to because I'm not cold. Although, I should be cold because I'm in Newcastle this month and it is colder up here than where I live. But anyway, I am here to talk about a subject which has been in my mind for a long time, but it became specifically relevant to me a few weeks ago. I have recently become aware that several producers I know have experienced similar issues with models asking them to remove the content that they have shot of that model from their pay sites. And it's a bit of a controversial topic, so I'm going to have a go at discussing it, because my take on this is it's a completely unethical thing for a model to ever ask. I'm aware this is going to make me sound like a massive pick-me, so I'm going to explain my thinking. So this is something that happens from time to time when producers and photographers shoot content that they then publish online, which is what most people these days are doing with their content. They ask the models on the day of the shoot to sign a model release, to sign away the model's rights to that content and give the producer the rights to that content. And this model release will typically give the producer rights to the content in perpetuity. So theoretically, he could pass it on to his descendants and they could carry on publishing it for the next 1,000 years if they wanted to. And that is one of the reasons that models get pretty well paid. It's not just for the pleasure of our company or the fact that we're getting naked, it's because we are signing the rights to the content that's being produced to the producer so that he can then go ahead and make money from it in the future. So in our industry, models tend to get paid on the day of the shoot, so the money comes to them instantly. Whereas for a producer, once he's got the content, he will then put time into processing, into editing, and into uploading that content. And typically, the time it takes to do all of that work actually is longer than the time it takes to do the shoot. So by the time the content has been published, it represents the fee that the producer paid the model, but it also represents all the time the producer put into the project as well. So when models contact producers asking them to take down content that they have already published, one of the major problems with that is that the model has already received the money for the job that she did, but the producer has often not made back that money yet and might not be in profit for several months or even years after the content is first published. So when a model contacts a producer or photographer asking him to do this, she is potentially asking him to basically destroy the work that he has paid for and that he has not recouped funds from yet. Now, obviously there is a kind of scale with this because there are lots of different situations this could happen in. For example, the photographer could be an amateur photographer. He might not be making any money from the pictures. So the pictures represent the money that he spent on the shoot and the time that he spent on processing those images, but he's not actually going to be out of pocket if he takes the pictures down. So that's one scenario. And I know in this situation, amateur photographers often will just take the content down because they feel it would be unfair not to, because often in these situations the model who is asking for the content to be removed will be saying that she's run into problems in her personal life because of being naked on the internet, or she's got a new partner who doesn't like it, or her family have found out. So there are lots of quite emotive reasons why a photographer might just think her right to privacy and a quiet life supersedes my right to have pictures that I shot and paid for. And my issue with that is that I can see why photographers sometimes do that, especially amateur photographers, but the way it can make those photographers feel about the work that they shot can be quite detrimental, because really if you're asking a photographer to take down the work that he thinks is beautiful, you know, that's why he will have shot it, it seems like the effect on him might be to make him feel that the work he shot is not acceptable, that it's somehow dirty, that it's a shameful secret that he should delete because it will harm the model who posed for it. So while I can see why photographers sometimes just do what the model says, I do think it's a pretty below the belt thing to ask even an amateur photographer. Then there can be scenarios where, for example, the work might have been published 20 years ago, so the shoot was 20 years in the past, and the photographer will definitely have recouped his investment by this point. And at that point I can see why a photographer or a producer might just think, yeah, fair enough, I paid her $600 15 years ago or whatever, I've made that back and then some, okay, fair enough, I'll take it down. But the situation this often occurs in is not an amateur producer, and it's not someone who shot 20 years ago. It will be a model that the producer shot a year ago or 2 years ago. And that is where it becomes so problematic for the photographer or producer. And because this has happened to several producers in my acquaintance recently, I want to talk more about why I think it is just completely unacceptable. To begin with, I think it's really offensive that a woman in this day and age, in a field where being a woman gives you so much power and so much economic power, I think playing the damsel in distress victim is quite distasteful. In this industry, women make more money than men, mostly. Women are the ones with the fan base, more often than not. And I think trying to make the producer feel like he exploited you by shooting you for the content you were willing to pose for, you were willing to take money for, and that you were willing to sign a model release for, is a pretty shabby move. Now, obviously, models' lives do move on. Models often are relatively young, and sometimes clearly they do not think through the consequences of being naked on the internet. And I can see it must be really difficult if you at 24 were 100% happy to be naked on the internet, but you at 28 wants to be a primary school teacher. That is a difficult thing, but we are adults. There are many reasons why you have to be legally an adult before you're allowed to pose for this kind of work. And one of them is because as a society we've decided that consent is something that we take really seriously, and you have to be an adult in order to consent to this work. And when you go and work with a bondage producer or a erotic photographer or anyone in that kind of field, they are assuming that you are a consenting adult because you're overage and because you are turning up to the shoot. And I think to try to rescind that permission because you didn't think through the consequences, it seems a bit like you are kind of infantilizing yourself. You were an adult, you turned up to work to do an adult job, you got paid like an adult, you signed a contract like an adult, and it's your job to behave like an adult if you then start to feel as though you'd like to move on in your life, because that is your issue, not the producer's issue. Now, because we have shame and stigma in our society associated with getting naked or doing sexual things on the internet, I imagine that what I'm saying will be sitting really uncomfortably with some people listening, because I know I sound really lacking in compassion for women who have made mistakes professionally and are trying to erase them. So I wonder if a couple of analogies might help, because when models do this, it's a little bit like a Hollywood actor who was in a blockbuster movie 2 years after the movie came out saying, I don't want to be an actor anymore, please stop selling that movie on DVD and Blu-ray. Please don't let it be streamed anymore. And I think probably most of us would realise that this actor who's been paid by the film studio does not have the right to make the film studio stop profiting from a movie that they made, that they invested in, that involves multiple people, not just that one actor. And so when models do this, they're doing the equivalent. The producer might have hired a location, other models, he might be in it himself, he might have hired an editor, he spent all the time writing the story and the advertising copy, all the uploading, all the keywording, and of course he's done a lot less work than a Hollywood film studio has done, and the model has been paid less than a Hollywood actor probably. But really we're looking at the same situation, but just in a very much smaller, more modest field. And when I think about it that way, I see how really unfair and absurd it is for a performer to do that for content that is already out in the world. That's before we even get to the issue of piracy, because these days once something is published, it is pirated. So asking a producer to take down the work will ensure the producer can't make any more money from it, but it won't affect at all the fact that that work will still be out on the internet, and indeed some pirates might be profiting from it, which is a whole other issue, which is infuriating. But that is the reality of the internet we are currently dealing with. Porn is pirated just like mainstream media is pirated on a pretty large scale, and so it feels particularly egregious these days to ask a producer to take down work that is already out in the world being enthusiastically pirated and wanked over by people who've accessed it illegally. And there's no way as a model you'll be able to get all that taken down, unfortunately. So it seems particularly futile to go after the producer who paid you and made this work. When I was younger, much younger, and before I was a model, I used to take office work in between acting jobs. And I remember one particular time I'd done some work for Birmingham Social Services Child Protection Department, and I'd made them some kind of questionnaire, but my contract came to an end and I left, and they phoned me a few weeks later to ask me where that questionnaire that I'd made was saved, because they paid me to do the work. I'd saved it on their computer system but they couldn't find it, and of course I told them how to find it. And it strikes me that when you leave a job, the work you have done stays the property of your employer at the time. Now, my little questionnaire was the property of the employer. They paid me to make it, and the idea that I might have said, well, I'm not going to tell you because I've left and I don't want you to have access to the results of my labour while I was in your employment. And I really don't see why being a naked model should be treated completely differently from any other field of employment, because from my point of view, I think this is a point I've made often on my channel, I desperately want models to be treated the same as professionals in other fields. I think I've made this point often. I want the conditions that we work under to be the same. I don't want to be treated worse because I'm a naked model on the internet. I want to be treated with equal respect without being stigmatised. I don't want to be assaulted just because I'm naked at work. I want equality for models. And generally that's about securing rights that are in our favour. And I don't think you should do that unless you're prepared to occasionally admit that if you want to be treated exactly like the rest of the workforce, that might occasionally not work in your favour, and I think this is one of the situations where that is the case. If we think, as I do, that being a naked model shooting fetish content is totally okay, which I do from the bottom of my heart, I think that's an absolutely legitimate job, then why would I ever be ashamed of it? Why would I ever have to demand that it's taken down? If you're proud of the work you did, and if people are stigmatising it, you are not wrong, and the producer who shot it certainly isn't wrong. The people who are stigmatising it are wrong, and really, once you're demanding that a producer takes down his work of you, you're just perpetuating the stigma, which might be something you're comfortable with, but if, like me, you actually think erotic content is fine and fetish content is absolutely fine, then what the hell are you doing treating it as though it is something dirty that you need removed from the internet for your own protection and peace of mind? I just think it's hugely hypocritical. Either you're not okay with that work, in which case what are you doing working in that field, or you are okay with it, which means you should really be okay with it in perpetuity. I do think it's interesting that now that more and more models are actually going into production, and a lot of models are now collaborating with each other to produce shared content, I wonder what's going to happen with this, because my instinct is that the models who are trying to make producers take down their work are attempting to trade on the kind of white knight instincts of a lot of decent men. And I wonder if they'd even dare ask another woman, because my guess is that they might not, because I think they might realise that a woman will see that for the absolutely absurd demand that it is. So I'll be interested to see how that works out. Certainly, if one of the models who I have hired for my custom video business, if they came to me and asked me to take the work we shot together down that I'm in, I would be really offended, because I shot stuff I was proud of that I will stand by forever, and the idea of my previous co-performer stigmatising it like that would be massively offensive and hurtful to me. So what is my message to my fellow models? Because I don't want to just be hostile towards us. The majority of us would never do this anyway. But clearly it is something that happens on a kind of regular basis. So I do want, if you are a model listening to this, or a prospective model, this is what I would like to say to you. To begin with, think really carefully before you shoot any of this stuff. I don't honestly think this is a great job for an 18-year-old who's not thought through what they want their life to look like to do. Personally, I feel like it's the sort of career that it's a bit safer to go into when you've maybe done university or done a few years of work in some other field where you maybe just have a better understanding of the permanence of this kind of work and the sort of values you think you are going to develop as you go through life. I think it has to be said, if I'm going to be honest, is that one of the reasons that models are so well paid in this field is because of the stigma. The fact that there is a stigma about being naked online means that there is a smaller pool of people who are prepared to do it, and that pushes up our modelling rates, which is lovely, but it is evidence in part of stigma. And I think you do have to think really carefully about whether you are going to be comfortable in a career where people will not always welcome you with open arms, and that might include your bank not wanting your business, it might include Airbnb kicking you off their system, it might include members of your family being disapproving and even ceasing contact with you. That is the reality, very sadly. I hope that will change in the future, and we can be part of that change by refusing to allow people to stigmatise us, by behaving as though we are proud of the work we do. So I would say that this is not really a job that you should do for a short period of time because you need a little bit of extra money. If you're going to do it, the images will probably be out there forever, and so I don't think it's worth going into unless you're planning to stay in it for a long time. Now, obviously things might change in your life and you might not stay in it for as long as you were originally planning to, but I think at least you need to enter it with the mindset that this is a permanent change to your life and that you can't go back once your content is out in the world being viewed as pornography. Now, you may be thinking, this is terribly anti-woman of me and anti-model. And you may be thinking, yes, but what about producers? Don't they have some responsibility? And the answer is yes, of course they do. Of course they do. So what I would say for producers is, to begin with, don't book anyone who seems young and uncertain about what they want. If they're not interested in the content, or if they seem a bit judgmental about it, or if they just seem to be in a really financially unstable state, I think you are on somewhat dodgy ground ethically by hiring them. I think best practice generally is to hire people who seem enthusiastic, interested, and professional in their outlook. I have over the years heard producers sort of chasing after amateur models who really don't seem keen on the work, seem very uncertain about it, but the producer's very excited to get them on camera because they've never been in any kind of porn before. And I think that is a somewhat predatory instinct, and I think it would be best practice not to do that. Secondly, both before the shoot and during the shoot, don't ever push someone's levels. Once you've agreed what levels you're going to shoot to, I think it puts you in a very uncomfortable position ethically to try to escalate the activities you take part in during the shoot. And so I think you need to be really careful and really scrupulous about sticking to your plan, explaining what you're going to pay for what content, and then playing it very much by the book after that point, because I don't think you have a leg to stand on morally if you pressurise a model to work beyond the level she's happy with at the shoot and then she asks you to take the content down. At that point, I feel like she's absolutely in the right. She might not be legally in the right, but morally, she is in the right. Thirdly, always get the model to sign a model release on the day and then check it carefully. The model release won't be valid if there are any mistakes on it, so just check it carefully and possibly fill in all of it yourself except for the signature, rather than asking the model to do it, just so that you can be sure she's not lied on it. I do know of a model who used to put a fake name on her model release because she didn't want anyone to know her legal name, and obviously that makes it invalid. It won't match the ID that you also need to take photographs of, so obviously you don't want that happening. Don't hold on to content longer than necessary, because the chances of a model trying to make you take stuff down will increase as years go by. So for most models, they will still be happy with that content the year after they shot it, but possibly if you hang on to it for 10 years, by the time you publish it, that model may well have moved on in her life, and although again legally you do have the right to publish it, you are on slightly less comfortable ethical ground if you've hung on to it for a fifth of her life, because yes, the chances are that her life will have moved on quite considerably. I mean, I think that's a very minor point. You do still have the right to publish it, but broadly speaking, it seems like maybe not hanging on to it for a really long time might be a better practice. And finally, because I've heard of this happening multiple times recently, a suggestion a couple of producers have made to me seems like a really good one that I wanted to pass on, to put something on the model release about what your expectations are for the content. So for example, to state on the model release that if the model rescinds her permission to publish in 5 years' time, you will expect a certain fee back, like her fee plus 50% for the time you've taken in processing the pictures, or her fee plus $1,000, or really whatever you want, and which seems reasonable. If you put it up front on the model release, then at least you have flagged the subject up with the model and given her an opportunity to think about the fact that if she wants the work taken down in the future, this is going to cost her actual money, just to make it as clear as is possible for you to do. And I think that is a really good ethical thing. I mean, most models would be aware of that. I would totally be aware that if I wanted someone who'd shot with me to take down the work, I would have to compensate them for that. But because it is obvious that some models are very surprised when a producer asks for financial compensation, it does seem like, yes, maybe it's best practice to make that really, really obvious on the day of shooting, because possibly it might make someone who's a bit uncommitted think twice about it. So I really hope that is helpful to producers who have maybe felt guilted in the past taking work down. You shouldn't feel guilty. Your work is legitimate and legal. I hope it is maybe informative to models or prospective models who maybe haven't thought through this issue very deeply. And I hope it's useful for fans of this kind of work to understand some of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes at photo shoots. And I'd like to end, since I'm making my least pro model video ever, I would like to end by saying, if you are a woman working in this industry, this is one of the few industries in the world where being a woman really pays. In this one industry, we are the ones with the power. We are the way men have been in other industries historically. And I think if you exploit the men who you hire or the men who assist you in any part of this job, if you don't pay them properly and if you don't respect their labour, if you're that kind of woman, you are like the men who used to pay mill workers only half the salary if they were women. You're doing the exact thing that men used to do by exploiting women 100 years ago. And I feel like, wouldn't it be better to be like the men who fought with women for equal pay? I think so. So hopefully I will never say another negative thing about models, because it's very uncomfortable. I love my sister models. And of course, as I said before, the majority of them would never do anything like this to a producer. They think it was really shoddy, shabby behaviour, which I firmly believe it is. But because there is a minority of models who will do this, and in the process of doing it will try to make the producer feel like some sort of sex offender, I thought it was worth discussing. So thanks as always for listening. Oh my god, I'm scared of the comments. But it's important to talk about the difficult subjects, especially when you've got a new coat. Thank you as always. Please join me next month for more. Like, subscribe. Thanks for listening. Bye bye now. Bye bye now. Bye bye. Bye bye.